This video explores the theme of language and power within the dream house. It's quite important to note that with all the themes, but especially with this theme, there's quite a lot of interpretations to the theme and to what the relationship between language and power is. But I'm just giving you my interpretation and hopefully it'll be helpful to you. So the novel initially tries to show us, or appears to show us, that English speakers hold the most power, and the ones with the most fluent English and the best English hold the most power. For example, Patricia. But we see as we explore the novel further that this notion is flawed. English speakers aren't necessarily the most powerful, and silence can also be a form of power. So if we start by looking at Patricia, she speaks fluent English, which makes her appear powerful because it is linked to the linguistic strength of colonialism. So colonizers were often white English speakers, and this leads Patricia to believe that she also holds power, as the colonizers did many years ago. And she believes she holds power over the farm workers on the farm, many of whom didn't speak English as their first language. To look smart, he sees that Patricia, she is clever, but her particular kind of cleverness diminished others. So there's no doubt she was smart, but he felt as if she used her intelligence and her ability to speak English to demean other people. He notices it especially when she calls Beauty. She goes, Beauty, like she's calling one of her dogs. And Looksmart feels like he did many years ago when he felt that Patricia saw Grace as less than human. He feels that Patricia, in a way, sees Beauty as less than human, as, well, a dog. Not exactly seeing Beauty as a dog, but seeing Beauty as someone who doesn't deserve to be spoken as, or doesn't need to be spoken as, with the same amount of respect as, for example, Patricia might speak to a white man or even a white female. Patricia doesn't think much of the past or of Grace's death, but when Looksmart returns, he forces her to confront her role in the past and her beliefs of the relationship between language and power. And in reevaluating her past, Patricia accepts that there's a mystery that must run through all things, and accept that there's no one single truth. And this brings her to acknowledge that the power she thought she held in being white and in speaking proper English isn't as true as she believed. The power she holds is superficial and meaningless. She realizes that power doesn't arrive from status, or doesn't always arrive from status or from use of language, but rather from knowledge and from a willingness to reevaluate one's past behavior with integrity. Beauty isn't quite as good at speaking English, and she feels when she speaks that is quite alien, it's quite uncomfortable for her. She prefers isiZulu. For her, speaking isiZulu is like slipping into a song. Therefore, she appears to hold little power. But we see that later she is quite powerful because of her knowledge. So she adopts this mindset of powerlessness, even though we find out that it's not true. When Looksmart confronts Patricia, Beauty feels powerless to step in to intervene, even though she does have knowledge in her eyes, smoldering like a fire. She feels as if she shouldn't intervene in Looksmart and Patricia's argument, but Beauty actually knows a lot more than Looksmart or Patricia, so she does hold a form of power. She knows more of the truth than both Looksmart and Patricia. And Patricia's search for that truth shows Patricia what Beauty knew, and shows Patricia that Beauty's silence was actually a form of power. Looksmart says during the novel that power lies with those who withhold the information from others, and that's quite pertinent when we look at it in regard to Beauty. Even though Looksmart doesn't say it with reference to Beauty, we can see that Beauty does withhold some of her information, which gives her a form of power. For Looksmart, he uses different languages in different situations. As a child, he spoke English and he tried to get to speak very fluent English, to excel at English in order to please Patricia, because all he ever wanted to do was impress her. That's a quote. But when he returned to Delaney, he wants Patricia to feel guilty. He feels hateful towards her rather than loving, as he did at a young child. So he has an apparent loss of fluency, and this frightens Patricia because he feels that, or she feels that he's no longer subordinate to her. He's rebelling against her rules. So ironically, for Looksmart, it's a lack of fluency in English rather than a fluency in the language that brings him power over Patricia. But then when Looksmart speaks to Baekje, his fluency in English is what brings him power. Both Baekje and Looksmart feel as if English remains the language of lies and liars. But in Baekje's presence, Looksmart speaks English while Baekje speaks Zulu. So it's quite ironic and paradoxical, because when he's with Patricia, Looksmart tries to not appear fluent in English. But when with Baekje or when with other Zulu speakers, he speaks English. But we can see that Looksmart's views on language and how language links to power are quite flawed, because all his beliefs are based on the belief that he knows more about Grace's death than Patricia or Beauty. But of course we see that this is false, as Beauty holds more knowledge. For Baekje, language is not so important. The link between language and power doesn't really bother Baekje because he focuses more on emotions. He's quite silent and pensive, and this makes him appear less powerful, but he's deeply connected with his emotions. For Baekje, his love for his son, for Bongani, goes past the place where any words can reach. So for him, words and language are unnecessary. They aren't important. For him, love and emotions are much more important. He places value on the link he places value on his family and on his emotions rather than on how he appears, whether he appears powerful, and on his reputation. So ultimately we see that experience, knowledge, and empathy are the main factors in a person's power. One's use of language is not an indicator of their level of knowledge nor of their power. Now, obviously, we can argue the other way, in that people like Richard and Patricia, who do hold or speak better English, do hold more power because of South Africa's history. But in my opinion, what Higginson is trying to demonstrate is that this shouldn't be the case, that experience, knowledge, and empathy are factors in the real power rather than the superficial status power. So Higginson is kind of trying to demonstrate that what we show when we show or see reputation as power, this isn't always the true power. So language can do many things. It can summon and command, like Patricia does when she calls Beauty. It can comfort, like when Beauty speaks Zulu. It can construct one's identity. It can define relationships and redefine relationships, like when Looksmart returns to Delaney and speaks less fluent English and redefines the power dynamics between them. Language can silence others. It can summon emotions. It can dehumanize and hurt people. It can hide the truth, but it can also reveal the truth. It can create an illusion of status. So that was what I was speaking about earlier, where when often people like Patricia and Richard would speak more fluent English and that would make them appear powerful, but this isn't always the case. Knowledge and empathy are more accurate indicators of one's true power. Language can bridge the past and the present, like when Looksmart speaks about Grace. And it can create one's narrative, because we all need to create our own individual narrative in order to move forward. So language can reveal the truth, but it can also be more powerful than the truth. It can heal, which is arguably even more powerful than truth, because a single truth usually doesn't even exist. And one often takes more comfort in healing lies than in cutting truths. And we see that when Looksmart lies to Patricia and says, I'll look after your roses, I'll visit you in Durban, rather than telling the truth and saying to her, your husband is a murderer, or you were at fault during Grace's death. And we also see that the power of silence is shown on the last page, as Looksmart and Patricia drive past each other, and instead of reopening a conversation, each of them keeps their peace. So they choose to be silent as they pass each other, which gives them both power to keep their relationship civil. And then the last thing about language is that in the book, Higginson uses quite a lot of untranslated isiZulu. This is very authentic. It adds to the South African or African nature of the book, but it also adds to the lack of clarity in the novel, where this is emphasized by the mist and the confused recollections of the past. And as an English reader reading the novel and seeing this untranslated Zulu, we can get the gist of what it's saying through the context of the story, but we perhaps can't understand the exact words, which takes English speakers out of the comfort zone and adds to this lack of clarity. If we were to quickly look at some quotes, for my quotation list, I divided it into the theme of language as well as the theme of names and identity. But for this video, I'm mostly speaking about language. So for Beauty, speaking isiZulu is so much easier. It's something she can slip into like a song. It shows how comfortable she is. And when she's with Richard, she largely speaks in Zulu, but she'll say something like pull up your zip in English because she doesn't want to associate his vulgarity with the beauty of her language. With these words come hate itself. So words can bring emotions, but words can also not demonstrate the true depth of emotion. For example, Baekje's love for her son. Looksmart felt even then that words were not to be trusted. So he has quite an interesting relationship with language. And he doesn't completely trust it. And there it says the silence is roaring at them from its black throat. So silence can also be powerful. Sometimes a few words can be enough to show who a person is. So words can have power, but they may show incorrectly who a person is, or they may disguise a person's identity, or just show a certain side of them. So we do not talk about cis Grace. They choose not to. They prefer silence, and it may not give them power in the way we think about it, but it gives them comfort in thinking of Grace as something lost rather than trying to speak about her. So the topic of language and of power is quite a difficult one to negotiate because there's a lot of different interpretations. But I think the way I broke it down by character is quite an easy way to look at it and to examine it. And I do have an essay on it on my Stuvia. And if you guys have any questions, just send us a message and we'll help you out.